Welcome to Towle Talks, and welcome to Game Design 2. My name is Dr. Bradford Allen Towle Jr., and I'm setting these videos to help instruct a Game Design 2 course. We'll be going over the Unity game engine and game design principles in general. Ideally, this should be your second game design course. Hopefully you've had either one on your freshman level or one before this semester. If it's not, it's okay. As long as you've had data structures and networking, you should be able to get through this class just fine. I will warn you, this is an intense class. A lot of people don't associate gaming and game design with intensity, but it is actually one of the most difficult arenas in computer science if explored in depth, which we are going to do. The course starts off really easy, but it will become much more complex and much more difficult as the semester goes on. I will post a book we're using at the bottom of this movie. That way you can keep track of it or keep track of the reading. We'll be going through chapter 1 today. Please read it. It's a quick chapter. It's a quick book to read, a quick read. It's very useful. We'll be learning the Unity game engine tool. Remember, I've discovered that there's no point in actually trying to design or make something until you've learned how to use the tool properly, and then we'll get into the whole game design and trying to actually make our own game. So this is what you're going to see when you first open Unity. I'm assuming that you can actually install it and you've got it up and running. If you have problems, please either come see me or look online if coming to see me is not available. But you should be able to get it installed. For Microsoft Windows, it will install Microsoft Visual Studio, which is nice. I actually recommend Microsoft Visual Studio. But if you don't want Microsoft Visual Studio, it can also install something called MonoDevelop, so you can use that one as well. So when it comes up, you're going to see. You're not going to see these. These are all my little projects I've been working on or have been using as a testing. You're probably going to see just a gray. It says Create New Project here. So we'll go to New. Right here is this New folder. And then basically we can specify a project name and where we want to store it. This is actually going to create a directory, and inside it, it's going to create our project folders. It's so very important. We also can decide which if we want to import 3D or 2D assets, or if we want to do, sorry, not import, if we want to use 3D or 2D space by default. By default, we'll do 3D. Don't worry about asset packages right now. We'll talk about that later. So I'm going to call this blank project. So we're really not going to do a lot with this project. This is just kind of showing you how the Unity interface is set up. And we'll go to I usually like making my own subfolder here. So I'm going to make a new subfolder. We'll call it intro. So like I said, you're going to select a folder, and then this folder is going to become your project. So select that folder, so blank project, and we'll say create project. Take a couple seconds for Unity to work, and then it should bring up the project. If you are having trouble with getting Unity to work properly, I make sure when you run the Unity, you right-click on it and say Run with Graphics Processor and whatever your onboard 3D graphics processor is. Otherwise, it's going to run the graphics from the motherboard. So this is the basic window we get when we open up Unity. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the layout or the project view. Down here under the Project tab, you'll have two things, Console and Project. Console will be very important later on. This is kind of like what you might expect with a console like in a Microsoft Visual Studio or some other coding IDE. Your errors and messages and debugging statements will most likely be printed here. The project itself, this is going to show you all the files and all the assets that are in your project. Now I want to make a big clarification and differentiation here. Things inside the asset folder are not necessarily in your game. The only things that are in your game are things that are in your scene, which is main camera and directional light right now, and that's all that's in your game. These are assets that can be added to your game or be spawned in your game programmatically, but they're not necessarily in the game right now. Also, as we'll talk about this a little bit later, but any objects that are down here are what we call non-instantiated. So that these objects can be instantiated, and you can have multiple copies of a single type of object that's down here. So this just lists all the available things that you can do, that you can have in your game. If you've had any experience with Game Maker, think of this as your objects tab on the side. These are all the objects. They're not necessarily in your room. They're not necessarily in the game, but they're available for you to add. We'll talk a little bit later about proper etiquette and how you want to keep this organized. It's very important that you keep this folder organized, especially as the programs get larger. Here, this is all the things that are in your scene. A scene is basically a level that you're in, your level. You get multiple scenes in the game, and in fact you almost always will. So things here, I can add objects here, which we're going to talk about later, and they will be reflected here. Also, I will show, I can add a cube, and I can also say, we'll talk about those in a moment, I can also add a child to this cube. So I right click on a cube, and then I add another 3D object, say a sphere. Notice how the sphere is indented underneath the cube. This means that the sphere is a child of the cube. We'll talk about what this means in the next video, but this basically means that these coordinates are going to be based off, or these information over here is going to be based off, the origin is going to be based off the cube. Up here we have scene. This will give you a 3D view of the scene. If I right click and hold it, I can do what's called fly through. So W moves me forward, S moves me back, D moves me straight left, A straight right. This is really useful for positioning my camera in a 3D world. Not so useful in, say, a 2D world, but it'll still be a little useful. If I hold shift, things are supposed to go faster, which I appeared to do a little bit. Q moves me down and E moves me up. So this is, again, very useful for moving your camera around your scene when you're editing your scene. Again, I'm right clicking and holding it, and then WASD, just like a first-person shooter game, is going to move me around the screen, and then Q and E are going to move me down and up respectively. In the game view, this is going to be what you see when you play the game. I can literally, this is be from your main camera. If I hit play up here, this will start the game logic. Word of warning, if I hit play here, any changes I make over on the inspector will not be preserved. So if I say, you know what if I want to make this 2, for whatever reason, and I unpause it, or I undo the game, now notice it's gone back to 1. So this is done so you can edit things in game and test and debug things, but not keep those values when you go back to the old game. So make sure if you're trying to make permanent changes that that you're not currently playing the game. These other things here we're not going to talk about. These are different tabs I've added. When we get to animators and animation, we'll probably have these tabs up. The asset store is sometimes down here. It might be down here on your screen. This is just different things you can get from the asset store. I wouldn't worry about this too much until you're further along in your game development and you know exactly what you need. Over here is the inspector. Now this will show you all the properties of your objects. So I click on object, and you'll see that I have a transform. All objects are going to have a transform. This is going to show me my X, Y, and Z position, my rotations, and my scalar value, or scale values. And I can modify these and actually change the location of where this object is. Again, if I have a child object such as a sphere, the location is based off of the parent. So now I move the sphere 4 along the x-axis. I click the cube, and I can move the cube, and notice the sphere moves along with me because it's a child. Colliders and mesh renders we're going to talk about later. But these are just different components. These are different things that I've added to my object to give my object different functionality or properties. I can add component, and add all sorts of different components to make this particular object have different functionality or different properties. Finally, up here I have the hand tool, which will drag my screen around. It's nice so I can move my screen to edit things perhaps. I have the arrow tool, which will allow me to move objects I've selected, like I did with the box earlier. I have the rotate tool, which will allow me to rotate things. I've generally found that it's nicer to just use the rotate up the Euler angles up here for the rotation, but you can use it on your mouse if you want. And then finally, this is the scale tool. Same kind of story. I found it easier to use the scale tool, scale numbers up here, than to use the UI, but by all means it is available to you. And this will actually be a UI modifier. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but this will affect the bounds. You can also affect the bounds here, but this is generally used for the UI. So that is it in a nutshell. That's the UI. Again, this is the kind of the basic UI of Unity. Down here, if I want to create a folder, I can right click, go create a folder. I could say, name it, so Hero 1, and then everything inside Hero 1 would be assets that would go to the Hero 1 object. And if I need to, I can also create more folders, sprites, scripts, etc. But as long as all of these folders apply to this parent folder, Hero 1. So it's just like hierarchy, or just like inheritance. You want to go from an abstract idea such as heroes or Hero 1, and then go to specific things such as scripts, sprites, graphics, animations, etc. for Hero 1 inside it. And that's how you want to keep your project organized. It's very, very important that you keep this folder organized. If you lose organization here, your project will become a nightmare. So that was the basic interface of Unity. I hope you learned something. Again, please read Chapter 1, and I'll see you next time at Towle Talk.